Have you ever noticed the strongest person in the room is often the most exhausted? And that person keeping the peace is often the one losing themselves. What if the very qualities people praise in you are the same ones that are costing you your voice? Welcome back to the Beth B Effect, where the vibe is unmuted, unafraid, and unapologetic. I'm Beth, and before we start this podcast, I just want to be crystal clear that this space is offering reflection and lived experiences. It's not a replacement for therapy, and it's not a replacement for professional mental health care. And if you need support, please seek a licensed professional. In the last episode, we talked about survival mode, what it looks like, how it sneaks up in the corners of our minds and lays dormant until something dramatic happens. We suffer some trauma and it kicks in. And that moment, it forces us in a space and makes things extremely difficult. Difficult to think, breathe, function. So today we're going to discuss the roles we play in that space. Right? When we're in survival mode, what role do we play? What role do we learn to become so that we can protect ourselves emotionally? And we can start with the most two praised identities, the strong one and the peacemaker. And the funny thing is, most people never realize they're living inside these roles. And for me, that was a part of my spiritual journey. I believe that real strength is not just a personal strength, right? It's God's strength working through us. And sometimes the roles we carry are truly our roles. Again, it's who we become to survive. It's who we become to protect our emotions. Tonight's episode is about becoming aware of just that. So why do these roles form? When life feels unstable, people don't just change behavior, they change identity. Sometimes we have to become a different version of ourselves in order to survive. And who sometimes is the environment or our surroundings need us to become. We become the very person that can survive the situation that we're in. You learn what keeps things calm, right? What avoids conflict. We learn what earns approval. We also learn what reduces tension. And over time, that role feels natural. It starts to feel like it's who you're supposed to be. But then you stop and ask yourself, like, who did you learn to be to keep things stable? Because that environment made us feel unsafe. We had to shift gears. We had to become someone else. I recall a time when I was in a situation where I felt like if I shared my feelings, if I shared my thoughts, if I was emotionally connected to my words, and I shared those words with someone else, they weren't valued. I started to feel like a burden every time I spoke when I was just expressing my feelings. So what did I do? I became quieter. I became easier, more agreeable, until I became aware of what was happening to me, how it was affecting me, and how it was making me change. And the version of myself that I saw, I didn't like. And a part of me realized I became the strong one. And that's the most praised identity, right? The strong one, the dependable one, the one who handles everything, the person who never complains, the person who supports everyone else, figures things out, figures everything out, and rarely asks for help. And it looks admirable. But strength can become an armor. Maybe you carry everyone else's problems. Maybe you handle things privately, right? You never share your story. You never ask for help. Maybe receiving help feels uncomfortable. Again, maybe your needs look like a burden, right? So you become capable. But when you don't share how you feel, when you don't receive help, when you can't receive help, when you don't look for support, what does that look like? You isolate. You keep to yourself. You keep everything to yourself. And for the moment, that role protects you. That role can protect you. It can protect you emotionally, but it can later become the very thing that limits you. When you're always strong and no one checks on you, it sometimes because everyone assumes you're okay. Strength can come at a hardship, but hardship leaves at a cost. I remember a time when my health wasn't so great. I would sit and think about that all day long. It was the only thing I could think of. When I started to share pieces of what I felt, I could see that it was becoming a burden for some of the people who would listen to me complain. And I initially didn't take it as a complaint. I didn't think I was complaining at all. I felt like I was expressing how I felt to kind of help me process what I was feeling, process what I was going through, process what was happening to me. But that didn't always go over well. So I learned to be quiet. I learned to keep my feelings, thoughts, and emotions to myself because that's where I could better handle them. And there's a difference between performing strength and receiving strength. Performing strength, initially I was like, I have to carry this alone. But that spiritual strength showed up. And at that point, I realized I was supported, I was guided, and that I was not alone. I carried that role because I had forgot where my true strength came from. And here's a little piece, right? Constant strength can disconnect you from yourself. If you're always on the go, never thinking about or considering your own feelings, you yourself stop asking yourself, what do I need? How do I feel? What support do I deserve? And that doubles down on you being responsible for everything. Because now you're not only carrying the weight around you, you're suppressing the weight within you, even your own silence. You ever stop to ask yourself, am I strong or am I unsupported? Probably not. That's not the go-to. Another praise is the peacemaker. The peacemaker, the one who keeps harmony, right? The one who avoids tension. Maybe you say yes when you really want to say no. Maybe you apologize quickly. Maybe you smooth over problems. Maybe you manage other people's reactions. And you maintain stability, but you suppress honesty. Sometimes you lose your voice when you're desperately trying to keep the peace. And staying quiet isn't always an option. Sometimes workplaces undermine your opinion. Sometimes relationships don't value your worth. Sometimes environments feel unsafe. And choosing calm can be a strategy. And silence can be a protection. So sometimes it is necessary. I recall where I would show up to work every day, walked on eggshells, wondering if I was going to be able to return to work the next day. But again, before we realize that we're in that space, we do a number of things, like we apologize quickly. And not because we're wrong, but because apologies typically reduce tension. It restores the calm. It stabilizes the moment. Sometimes I'm sorry means I need this moment to be safe. And in those spaces is where we learn emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence means understanding emotions, but self-protection can distort it, right? You become highly aware of others. You read someone's tone. You watch micro expressions. You anticipate reactions. You manage the room. You read the room. In micro expression awareness, you notice small facial changes. You hear shifts in the tone of voice. That awareness protects you, but it also exhausts you. You've learned to read everyone else before you learned to hear yourself. It is exhausting to talk and always be able to detect when someone's not feeling what you have to say, when they don't value your words. It is exhausting to watch a person's facial expression go from interest to disinterest. It is exhausting to see the little space here show up when you're speaking and a person lose interest in what you're saying. They start to overtalk you because what you have to say doesn't matter, or it's not relevant, or it's not important at the moment. That is exhausting. And once I realized that was a capability, it became more and more difficult to speak my mind. And at first I started repeating patterns, right? I would have conversations with people that I knew weren't going to be interested in what I had to say, whether it was because of my own feelings or the topic was weird. But I learned a valuable lesson from doing that. I learned the definition of insanity. And I'm not mentioning that word to be judgmental or hostile at all. But I realized that insanity is repeating a pattern and expecting different results. And in that space, those protective habits that I formed, trying to talk to people, trying to change my words, trying to find the correct words, trying to soften my words, trying to maybe be a little more projective when I'm speaking, it created cycles. And I stayed in those environments hoping they would change. I repeated responses hoping for new results because familiarity feels safer than change. I hate change. I like for things to be the same. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But once I have to fix myself to heal the brokenness in something else, I become aware of that pattern. And becoming aware of that pattern forces change. And that's where I realized those roles that I played did help me. They helped protect me, but they required sacrifice. I had to sacrifice my voice, my needs, my authenticity. And if you know, you know. So eventually I asked myself, who would I be without this role? Who would I be if I didn't have to mask my feelings? Who would I be if I didn't have to muzzle my voice? If I didn't have to accommodate someone else's emotions? I performed a protective version of myself long enough to forget my original voice. Until now, I started to realize that I was in that space, and that's where we have to become aware of that space, become aware of that surrounding, become aware of what's forcing us in this piece, become aware of how our voices started to silence, become aware the first moment we forced ourselves to be quiet, become aware of the space we were in when our opinions weren't valued. Become aware of the space where I couldn't speak up for myself. Become aware of the moments where I didn't say anything at all. I would walk quietly, deal with my own silence, answer my own questions, deal with my own problems. When you become aware that you are the person that is doing everything, you have to take a moment and say to yourself, when do I show up for me? Again, this is about awareness. This is not finger pointing, and it's not blaming anyone else for the things that we decided or chose for ourselves. And this is not blaming us either. Things happen. And in this space, we like to keep the peace. I'm a peacemaker. And sometimes I can be the strong one. So I'm not pointing fingers at me, not pointing fingers at you. I am bringing awareness to the fact that sometimes in these spaces, in our surroundings, we force ourselves to be quiet. We force ourselves to be helpful. And it protects us in situations that we feel are important at the time. We stay in an environment and repeat cycles, hoping for different results. We stay in an environment, changing our words, becoming the grand chameleon, and nothing changes but us. Nothing changed but me. I became a different version of myself. Meanwhile, everyone else stayed the same. And before I close, I want to share this faithful moment. Many of us learned to be strong because we believed we had no choice. We carried everything. We kept the peace, but the real strength is not isolation. Psalms 23 reminds us that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We are guided, we are protected, and we are not alone. And Psalms 91 reminds us that we dwell under divine covering in a place of safety where we do not have to perform protection. Sometimes healing begins when we remember who God created us to be. Where in your life are you being the strong one? Where are you keeping the peace at your own expense? And when you answer those two questions, please be compassionate with yourself. Give yourself grace. And if this resonates with you, please tell me which role you recognize. Tell me in a word. Leave it in the comments. This has been the Beth B Effect, where we don't just endure, we evolve. And until next time, stay grounded.